master's thesis on Galamsey.
Oh,
And
okay.
I am from a computer science background. I didn't really catch what she was doing. She sent it for me, to me to review for her. So I didn't have the time to review all the editorials and the research papers. So I just uploaded everything in DeepSeek. I, I, I prompted DeepSeek. I was giving the prompts to DeepSeek, and it was just extracting everything for me. And I was able to put everything together and submit to it. Yeah.
Awesome, thank you. I think the word simplicity is running through, and maybe efficiency as well. Thank you so much for sharing. So good morning once again, our specially invited guests, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, here in the room at Alisa Hotel, and those online joining us from all across the globe. On behalf of UNDP Ghana Senior Management Team and colleagues, I warmly welcome you all to the Ghana launch of the 2025 Human Development Report. Thank you ever so much for making the time to be here with us today. My name is Elikem Shika Nyatefe, and I'm with the UNDP Ghana Digital Transformation Team. I'm honored to serve as your MC for today's important conversation. The 2025 Human Development Report, titled A Matter of Choice, People and Possibilities in the Age of AI, explores how artificial intelligence is transforming societies and economies around the world. And what we must do to ensure that transformation is both equitable and human-centered. The 2025 report is the 35th edition of one of UN's most influential reports that reaches 3 million people across 220 countries and territories. The report features Human Development Index, which tracks progress across a variety of indicators. And as we'll see later, we are at a critical moment. Progress in human development is slowing down and inequalities are rising. Yet more than half of the world's population remains hopeful that AI can help improve their lives. At its core, the report reminds us that development is not just about innovation or technology or GDP growth, but about expanding people's freedoms, creating jobs, improving education and healthcare, and driving inclusion. But that outcome is not automatic. It's all about the choices we make. For Ghana, the challenge is clear. We must invest in people He served as UNDP's resident representative in Malaysia, Singapore, and Brunei, and held several leadership roles at UNDP's headquarters in New York and across the Asia-Pacific region. Niloy holds a master's degree in economics from Jawaharlal Nehru University and is a fellow of the City University of New York. With a warm round of applause, let's invite my boss, Mr. Niloy Banerjee.
My God, nicer words have not been said. You should say that to my wife. Thank you, Aiken. Friends, distinguished participants, friends of UNDP, friends of the UN, people in the media, and my dearest UNDP colleagues who are in the audience, friends from the diplomatic corps. I see a few CD cars outside. Thank you for coming here today. I somehow failed to register how much time I have to do my opening remarks, but I could go on for the rest of the day. So, somebody hold up a honest hand when I'm going on for too long. Just to give you a little bit of a backdrop, colleagues, in 1990, two of the world's foremost economists came together. One is a Pakistani economist called Professor Mahbubul Haq, and one is now a Nobel Prize winner, an Indian economist called Amartya Sen, who taught me at university, by the way, and often scolded me for my performance. Came together to say, look, should human well-being, should the well-being of countries be measured in just income terms, how much money they make, what is their gross GDP, and what is their per capita income. By that standard, of course, the US and Switzerland would be top of the world. Whereas Ghana, with our per capita income at 2,200 odd US dollars per year, would be pretty much at the not so registerable end of the spectrum. But then they said, look, human well-being is not simply a function, a linear function of how much money you make as a country, and therefore how much every average citizen has as disposable income. They said it's a measure of the overall well-being of the country, whether people are happy, whether people are getting enough education, whether they're getting enough healthcare. That was the genesis, friends and colleagues, of the human development concept. And we produced in 1990 a fairly complex, it's still not perfect, because you can't reduce all of human welfare, well-being, whether I'm feeling good or not so good, or happy or not so happy, into one index number. It's a fairly complicated mathematical exercise as well, but they did. They tried to, because it would serve to guide policy. It would serve to guide investments. It would serve to guide what people and governments would focus on. If a government has 100 million only to invest, where would they invest it? What would be their priorities? This was the essence of the exercise. And therefore, since 1990, friends and colleagues, UNDP has been producing almost annually. We slipped a little bit over the last few years because it's become a fairly complex exercise. Each human development report takes 3 years of prep work. And so you have to literally, as we speak, the next human development report is almost nearing completion for the next year, for 2025. And the one for 2026 is under preparation. So folks, just to say that it's not a perfect measure. Reducing all of human well-being into one number is not, into one composite complex index number is not an easy thing. But if you unpack that number and what lies beneath and underneath, then it gives policymakers a serious North Star to be guided by. Where to go, what to do, what could be. So let me just say that every year the Human Development Report has a theme. Every time we produce a human development. But look, it's obviously a huge species, the most intelligent species on Earth ever, who are also making a mess, a little bit of the planet, a little bit of inequality, a little bit of many other things. So how do we have more intelligent conversations using artificial intelligence? So that was our first quest. But then we also looked at the defense side of the game. What will artificial intelligence do to other issues like data protection? Once artificial intelligence logs into you, and you are providing information just in the form of what is called a prompt in the AI language, meaning you're asking a question, it immediately logs on to you and gets a lot of data about you. Number one. Number two, where then are our national regulatory systems which protect data privacy, data protection? And number three, you know, I grew up the son of a civil servant who was an engineer in the government of India, and a mother who was a professor in a university. So I had access to all kinds of knowledge resources from day one. What about the son or daughter of a person who works in a construction site as a daily wage worker? And maybe the spouse or the wife works as a domestic help in some person's house. What will their child, what access will they have? Do they have broadband? Do they have a dedicated machine which they can use for AI? And I just want to, for 1 second, take a tangent and point you to something called another product of UNDP. We measure poverty not just in income terms, but there's something called the multi-dimensional poverty index, where we really look at human conditions which shape poverty. During COVID, and I was at the time, as the MC introduced me, I was at that time in Malaysia. Malaysia is highly cyber sophisticated, almost 95% internet penetration. Yet there were families which were sharing one room with 8 or 9 adults and one internet connection, and then the children were somewhere in the background, trying to also get, you know, because schooling had moved online. Remember COVID, if you remember. So poverty is not just income, it's also a number of other factors. But anyway, folks, I want to focus a little bit on Ghana, and I'll quickly get off the stage and not bore you too much, because as I said, I can speak for the whole day on this topic. Ghana's ranking in the, the one last thing methodological on the human development, it's a scale of 0 to 1, 1 being almost perfect, 0 being almost non-perfect. So Ghana ranks at 0.62, which is kind of in the middle. The highest ranking countries, Norway, etc., are in the 0.89 category. And it's a league table, so it also depends on not just how your team played, it's how other teams relative to you played. So Ghana's rank has actually slipped 10 points from the last time. So just a sobering note that other countries are maybe piping up better than we are. There have been marginal increases in income per capita, and I won't go into the details. You will find. Hey guys, have people received copies of this, or they have? Edward, Fatima, I'm looking at you. Okay. Do this. Anyway, look, so there is room to crank ourselves up. But then on top of this composite index, which we build out of three fundamental parameters: income, health, and education. Very basic parameters. What is the per capita income of the country? On education, it's two parameters. Average educational number of years of education, and average years of expectancy at birth, which means if a child is born today, how many years of roughly that child has to, will be in education, is expected to be in education given the conditions of that particular country. And this one I will unpack in a little bit because there's a slight twinge of worry there. And then of course health, your life expectancy and all the rest of it, maternal mortality, under 5 mortality, etc. So all of these numbers are brought together and crunched together and made into one composite index, okay? So, and then we layer on other numbers like the gender inequality index. How many women in parliament in Ghana? What percentage of Ghana's parliament is women? Let me have a show of hands. Who wants to answer? 14%, 14.2%, folks. And when you go home, please look up what percentage of women in Rwanda's parliament. Well above 60%. But go home and do that. I'll not take too much of your time. So we layer on other things like the gender inequality index. Then we also layer on something called the planetary index. On top of our human development index, we have already constructed now, we say how much load is this country putting on the planet. And Ghana's is slightly improving between last time and now, but it's still a bit of a planetary load on the well-being of the planet. Folks, I wanted to come back to number of years of expected schooling. Ghana has gone back a little bit backward in this. And I have a wicked hypothesis. I have a wicked hypothesis from seeing from my experience, having been in the UN and UNDP for 25 years, there is a new pernicious trend emerging that young men are increasingly disinclined to go to college. More and more women are going to college, and rah-rah to that. But young men are increasingly going less and less to college, tertiary education. I have a dirty little theory, and it's not proven, so don't quote me, friends in the media, please, that the gig economy is playing a role. You can be a Bolt food driver at age 23, and you can earn good cash today. I don't know how much, I'm too new in Ghana to be able to speak to exact numbers, but I don't know how much an average Bolt food delivery guy or girl makes per month. But it's easy cash at a young age. It's wonderfully tantalizing. What it doesn't do is want you to stay focused on making investments in your future. Back to AI, folks. If you keep delivering food or driving taxis at age 23 and not bother to invest in yourself, You will have no pension when you're my age. Okay, I've been given marching orders. I'll stop soon. You will not have the means to fall back on a rainy day. And most certainly, you will face that massive, massive digital inequality that AI could bring, despite all its promises. And I love it. I love it. And don't get it wrong, UNDP is using it extensively across the organization. In fact, I'm currently doing an AI course, which all res reps are required to do. But folks, if you're seduced by the idea of driving a delivery vehicle, food delivery or whatever, and not investing in your future, there will be a future where you're out of action because you're not qualified for it. You will just form a new underclass. And that is not what we want. That is not what we want for Ghana, and that is certainly not what we want for Africa. So bear this in mind. Say this to friends and policymakers that you know. Say this, practice this in your craft. Use it in your organizations. And I thank you all very much for the gift of your time today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Niloy. Up next, we have a distinguished individual. He is currently the chairman of Ghana's National Development Planning Commission, NDPC, and senior advisor to the President on the UN Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs. He has nearly 30 years of experience as an economist in both Ghana and abroad. He has held key roles in government and international organizations. He began his career in the US as a senior economist in New York City before serving as a senior economic advisor to the President John Mahama and Director General of the NDPC, where he has led the development of Ghana's 40-year national plan. He played a major role in integrating the SDGs into national policy and was part of Ghana's IMF negotiation team in 2015. Internationally, he has worked with the UNDP and ILO in South Africa, Ghana, and Sierra Leone, and authored the UN's post-COVID economic recovery framework. His recent work on productivity ecosystems was adopted by BRICS in 2023. I'd like us all to warmly welcome Dr. Nimoy Thompson, who would give us the keynote address.
Ouch, sorry. Thank you very much for the introduction and to the organizers. I received this invitation 3 days ago. Obviously, that's not enough time because we're very busy with other things, including the launching of the voluntary national review yesterday. So I was inclined to turn it down, but I accepted it for two reasons. One is that it was being organized by my alma mater. As she mentioned, I used to work with UNDP as a senior economist in South Africa. And two, the fact that the issue itself is very close to my heart, the issue of human development and its central role in our national development. I happen to have attended the sustainability conference in Hamburg about a month and a half ago, where we had panel discussions on this. So I'm a little familiar with the content of it, but I was a little worried about the timing I was told it was 9 o'clock, and so I scheduled everything to follow 9 o'clock. And then I got here and they said, well, you know, people usually show up at 9:30. So if one of which very memorable, it came to me in the form of a proposal from someone. I suspect it was AR, suspected later on. This is a highly developed proposal, and the person lives in the US. When you go through it, it's for Ghana's development, I think industrial policy. Very well researched, very laid out proposals for dealing with our industrial strategy. And I almost shared it with the president. But before that, I said, let me check and see the background of the person who wrote it. The letterhead didn't have any address or anything like that. So I managed to get the name. The name was there, so I managed to get the address, which was in Florida, the United States. And it turned out to be a UPS office. It's not a regular office. UPS, you all know UPS, it's like FedEx, pretty much. And then he started being evasive and so forth and so on. So the whole negotiations came to an end. And the only conclusion I could draw after doing some work online about the high end of AI was that possibly it was done by AI. All you have to do is to feed it with the necessary information. But that shows you the high potential of AI. And then only 3 days ago, I read on the New York Times had a story. I'm a subscriber to the New York Times. And by the way, I went to the City University of New York, Brooklyn College. So we are partners there. They also had a very interesting article on the future implications of AI, but more for an industrial economy, whether or not it will destroy jobs at the entry level or whether or not it will destroy jobs at the more mature level. But they have varied opinions. As with any technology, you will always have these kinds of different technologies. But of course, there's anxiety. But for us, in a developing country context, I think the first thing we need to remind ourselves of is that AI can never be a substitute, or artificial intelligence can never be a substitute for native intelligence, for how we ourselves think. The kinds of policy choices we make are ultimately based on us as individuals. And for Ghana in particular, it is very relevant. We've heard an overview of the trends in our Human Development Index. And the gap, I don't know how many of you have seen the result, but there are now two Human Development Indexes. One is the regular Human Development Index, and the other one is the inequality adjusted Human Development Index. And here, there's a huge gap, I think about 38% or so, between that and the inequality adjusted one. And it is very good, as Ninoy, as it said. Yeah, it's close. It's close. When I lived in South Africa, I had the biggest problem with my name. For some reason, everyone assumed that I was a Chinese woman when they saw my name. So they were literally expecting to see a Chinese woman. I get there, and they were disappointed to see a black man. The last one was that they were expecting a Chinese woman married to an Englishman called Thompson. But that's a different story. Anyway, so this is very critical, especially the adjustment for inequality, because this is very, very, very pronounced in Ghana. Socioeconomic inequality, inequality in terms of spatial development. We all know about the North-South division, and even policy choices that we make. And this is where I say native intelligence is critical, because in the note that I was given, I was asked to reflect on structural inequalities. And we have a lot of that in Ghana as a result of faulty choices made in the past. I have a little booklet there that I left. If someone, Titi, please give it to me. And it tells you, it goes, if you can get a copy and keep it. I lost my copy, and then I searched the author and he gave me a copy. It's called Education in Ghana, a Tool for Social Mobility or Social Stratification. It's a collection of lectures given by a former Vice Chancellor of Ghana. And it shows how our generation, those of us who benefited from public education, have somehow neglected public education to the detriment of current and future generations. Because in this book, he documents how we are reproducing inequality across generations by putting a certain cohort of kids through the neglected public education system. There's an example here from Koforidua where a private school has, I think, 41 students who got aggregate 6, the highest, and the rest was like 0, 0, 0. So the issue, and again, it goes to native intelligence. Someone made that decision that led to these things, and it is critical. If you Google, not now, because I want all your attention, 15 years ago, I wrote an article called Time to Abolish BECE. And in that article, I documented policy decisions that I thought were highly injurious to our education and yet had been considered and accepted by policymakers. And what were these decisions? The decision was that the BECE that we all take for granted, every year there's a ritual of policymakers going to BECE centers, praising them, wishing them luck and so forth. It turned out that the exam had been rigged by successive governments, such that no more than 60% of them could pass the exam at any time. And this goes back decades. So I actually met one of the educators and I asked him why this is so wicked. And he said, well, that's because we don't have enough space for secondary school education. But if you don't have enough space for secondary education, you build more. You don't restrict the ability or the opportunity of other kids to go there. And so this is what we've done. Now, the chickens have come home to roost. Because if you look at Ghana's economy now, well, 54% of the labor force have a maximum of JHS. These are the people that we basically conspired against. Another 20% have zero education. So effectively, we have a labor force where 75% almost are completely, not completely, but more or less not prepared for a 21st century economy. And this is where one major inequality that hopefully AI can help address. When you spoke earlier, you gave the example of the teacher. Something we want to consider when we are looking at the possible applications of AI is how we can use that to bridge this gap retroactively, because it is serious. You cannot operate in a modern economy when 3/4 of your labor force are simply not fit, because your engineers, your architects, your nurses, your doctors, pharmacists will all have to come from high school, not pre-high school. And so what is it? They are floating there in the informal sector where productivity is low, incomes are low, wages are low, and therefore you have a smaller tax base. A smaller tax base means what? Fiscal stress. Fiscal stress means that every 3 years you end up going to the IMF and someone keeps dictating your life for you. So we need to reflect on that when it comes to structural inequality. Another structural inequality which you'll find in the Ghana Living Standards Survey, and this also came to me as a shock, that the poorest socioeconomic group in Ghana are food crop farmers, followed by cash crop farmers. And then you wonder, how did we even get to this point where the people who feed us are the poorest, and the people whose sweat, bringing the dollars that we use to buy our V8s and Mercedes and whatnot, are also the second socioeconomic group, poorest socioeconomic group in Ghana. So again, this is something to be reflected upon and see how AI can be used to bridge this gap. Again, when my sister from UNDP spoke, she gave an example of how AI is being used to promote agriculture, bring productivity in agriculture. This is one area where we really have to explore, because agricultural productivity in Ghana is very low, very low. And the last time I spoke at I think the launch of the commission, I gave the extreme examples of the United States and Ghana, for example, where the agriculture accounts for less than 2% of labor in the United States, but the typical farmer in the United States produces over $100,000 per year. Whereas agriculture in Ghana accounts for around 30% of the labor force, but the typical Ghanaian farmer produces just $3,000 per year. So this disparity in productivity is equally critical. And where we can apply AI, I would strongly recommend that we apply that. The issue of inclusiveness and representation has been mentioned time and again. And yesterday, when we launched the voluntary national review, I emphasized a particular statistic. It's been mentioned here, but since most of you here, apart from NDPC staff, were not there, I would like to emphasize that because it goes to the very heart of our being as human beings, of course, as Ghanaians and development, and that is the welfare of women. Women as the source of life and the source of pretty much everything that's good with us. Now, here in the report, we are given statistics on maternal mortality ratio. It was 273.9 in 2017, and then it went down to 243 in 2019. It stayed there at 243 in 2019. And then it started rising again. That means more women are dying in childbirth. It went to 263.1. It stayed there at 263.1, then 263 as of 2023. Now, as I said yesterday, the issue of maternal mortality is not just a women's issue. To the degree that each and every one of us was born of a woman, it is our collective responsibility. And so we should all be worried that the incidence of maternal mortality is rising. Now, we've been reminded of the need to have more women in decision-making positions, which is all well and good. But I'd also like to caution the possibility, or caution about the possibility of gender tokenism, where you think the mere presence of women in certain positions translates into improved decisions for womanhood in particular and society as a whole. And Ghana is a typical example, because the last maternal health survey that I saw, the report I saw, gave very poignant examples of Ghana. It compared Ghana to Sri Lanka. At the time, Ghana's maternal mortality rate was 310, and that of Sri Lanka was 30. And the message there was that we could do better. Now, not long after that, one would have thought that at the very least the women in parliament would have summoned the Minister of Health or anyone in government responsible for that. But none of these things happened. Instead, the woman responsible for, the MP responsible for women's affairs somehow disappeared. Some of you may recall this period in our history. She disappeared and became a TikTok star. She was dancing and doing all those things. There's another MP, female MP, who right around the same time this report came out, also went to New York and gave birth there. And she shared a video of herself and her husband walking the streets of New York. So the message here is that the mere presence of women in decision-making is not enough of a condition to improve. And indeed, it may take some men, like myself, to raise the importance of these things. Not because I'm a woman, for obviously, despite what they thought about Chinese women, but because, as I said, we're all born of a woman. And the more you think about it, the more you realize that that moral obligation, and as I said yesterday, we discussed this 10 years ago when we were preparing the 40-year National Development Plan. Now, what should we do about maternal mortality ratio, which was very high then, and our objective was that it should be reduced to 0 by 2057. We were told that no, it's not possible, that even in the advanced economies, there is maternal mortality. And we said no, that under no circumstances should a woman who goes into a facility to bring life into this world then loses her life. It doesn't make sense, especially in the case of Ghana, where we know that the factors contributing to high maternal mortality rates are this and this. And then they had to go through labor, sometimes hours, sometimes days. They bring us into this world. They come home, they fix food. So it's like they carry the weight of the world on their shoulders, and yet they get the short end of the stick. And so we need to do much better in dealing with these things. And I'll go over what we intend to do at NDPC as we begin to set a new path for our national development. There's a point here that talks about the ethical and inclusive deployment of AI, and I couldn't agree with you more. It should be both ethical so that those who make the decisions are mindful of the implications of AI's deployment in terms of who's left out and who's not. Even now, as we talk about digital technology, there are substantial segments of the population, both within socioeconomic groups and in terms of administrative regions, that are left out. So I'll really encourage you to focus on that aspect of the deployment of AI. Now, since time is so far spent, I'm going to zero in on the role of NDPC in terms of our support. Yesterday after the program, I was very glad that a number of UN agencies reached out to me asking for us to work together, and I'm really happy. I did mention the need for attitudinal change. Those are soft issues in development that we often don't talk about, but it plays a substantial role in how we even view women. That there's a trotro in town. I used to see that. I don't see that anymore. It's on the back of it. It says, "Women are wicked." Now, I know some of you are laughing, but serious. It's a deep indictment of the society that is so morally bankrupt that someone can actually ride this on a vehicle and drive around town and see nothing wrong with that. And sometimes you see the same statement made on WhatsApp platforms. Women are wicked. So I ask them, does that include your mother? And then they keep quiet. So attitudinal change itself is critical to reinforce the relevance of the policies that we're going to do. Now, let's look at NDPC, what we're going to do, and then I'll run out of here and go fulfill my other assignments. We are introducing something we call 3D approach to measuring economic performance. So we are no longer just looking at economic growth in terms of GDP. People, frankly, are sick and tired of hearing that because it makes no sense to anyone. Last year, it grew by 4.7%, and so what? You can relate to that. This is what the HDI, in part, is designed to address. But we want to address it from a Ghanaian perspective. So yes, we'll continue to measure GDP. We'll measure it somewhat differently, but still measuring goods and services, expenditures by household. So that's one aspect of the 3D. The other aspect is measuring employment and decent work. Professor Bambuatin has just stepped out. He's a commissioner, and he has the responsibility of working with us to make sure that we are able to measure not just GDP, but the jobs, the amount of jobs, and the quality of jobs that we produce as a result of that GDP. Because it's not enough. We can replace every worker in Ghana with a robot, and GDP growth will just move from 4% to 20%. But the question is, what will be the value or the benefit to the average Ghanaian? So it should grow, yes, but it should also create employment. And then the third dimension is earnings or wages. I usually use earnings because it then covers both formal and informal sectors, since the informal sector is dominant. But we need to find a way of making sure that when Ghanaians are working, they are also earning enough to take them home, and that they are not effectively trapped in working poverty. There are ways of measuring that. The ILO, which I also worked with briefly after I left UNDP, I went to ILO, talks about decent work. So social protection, social dialogue, workplace rights, and so forth and so on. You go to so many workplaces where people are exposed to so many hazards, and no one really thinks about that. And yet there's a link to that, and they're very health, especially those in the informal sector. And then lastly, once we've established these three dimensions for economic growth, we then need to localize them. Because too often when we talk about national development, we focus on the national economy and forget the fact that the national economy itself is made up of the local economies. It's an aggregation of all the local economies. And in the case of Ghana, we have 261 local economies. And yet, you look, when you pass through the policies, you pass through the numbers, it's as if only Accra, and even within Accra, it's just one or two districts that receive everything. And yet we need to find a way of spreading economic opportunities and therefore economic participation in these 261 district assemblies. And so just by coincidence, when I leave here and I get back to the office, I'm actually meeting with our team to strategize on how to mainstream local economic development so that we bring it up to the same national level as other policies that receive attention at the national level. And so I'd like to end here, at least pause here, and thank you very much again for your for organizing your very kind introduction. And I'm glad to know that my brother from City University, CUNY, is here also. Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right, thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Nimoy Thompson. I know Doctor wants to run away, but before he does, we'll take a photo. So I'd like to invite the Mr. Niloy Banerjee, Madam Shaima Hussein, the panel as well. We'll have a panel discussion soon. So the panel will take a picture now, so please come forward. Seth and the panelists, please. We'll take a picture now. Yes, please, upstage. Thank you very much. Dr. Nimoy's keynote was packed with a lot of insights. And one of my key takeaways was AI can never be a substitute for how we think. Fear not. And he also talked about attitudinal change. There were so many other things he said that I'm sure most of us took notes of. And please let's apply them as such. Next, we have the presentation of the global HDR, and it will be taken by Mr. Yusuf Musa. Please let's give him a warm round of applause.
Good morning. Yes. So I will try to summarize the report this year. A lot has been said from the RES rep himself. All I will try to do is build on what he's already done. And then maybe just give more details because the flesh has been already fleshed out. Is my presentation coming? Am I supposed to do this one? It's not working. Okay. So the Human Development Report has already been explained. It's a complementary index to what we already know, to the GDPs and all other measures, not substitute. I always will want to start with that. So don't think that when you think development, you cannot think GDP anymore, or the 3Ds Dr. Nimoy mentioned. But it's to complement that. And why this is important is that when we grow, when we have GDP that is at what? If it's growing at 100% and we are not happy, we are not developing as people. The whole point of development is people. You'll agree with me. And so that's why some countries are doing interesting things, like Bhutan. You know, Bhutan, they measure their development, and they have an index on happiness, you know? So if we're growing and the guys are not happy, then we might as well stop. So that's very important. And that is what the HDR tries to bridge. With this said, I want to take you through, I think what is on your mind now is what is... Okay. Yes. What do we mean human development? So how do we measure that? So we have three components. We have longevity, which is life expectancy, right? How long you're expected to grow in Ghana. We have knowledge, which is explained by expected years of schooling, mean years of schooling, and then we have GNI per capita that usually will use purchasing power parity instead of exchange rate. What that means is that instead of using the exchange rate, we use prices in domestic economies. For example, if I buy this clicker from the Indian economy for, what's the Indian thing? Rupees. So if I buy for 10 rupees and I buy for 1 cedi in Ghana, using PPP methodology, you can say 1 rupee, 10 rupees is called 1 cedi. So just the prices of the same good in different economies. I mean, it's more complex than that, but that should explain it. So yes, like I mentioned, we want to center humans. With this background, I'll move on to, okay, this is the screen. Okay. So I want to move you to the actual figures. What is it saying at the global level? So we're seeing, when it started, the HDR has been growing all this while. Think this. You can see, oh, I'm not tech savvy. No way. Can you just control from there? So that when I give you thumbs up, you move. Okay, so I'm here. Yes, so we can see when we started, it's been growing, right? We were happy. Oh, listen, we're changing. We kept changing the goalposts, like Niloy said. We kept trying to give more meaning to the figures. We kept trying to see how we can interpolate better to actually reflect what we're trying to measure. And it's been growing, even as we change the goalpost. The goalpost means a change in methodology, like more depth, more explanation to the actual figures, which the HDR does all year round. So every year we try to see how do we improve this. So it's not like the way we calculated it in 1990 is not the same we're calculating it in 2025. We keep changing the goalpost. And at each year, it's a different thing. It's maybe detailed data. That's why we are able to adjust this to planetary pressure